What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for turning to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming at you with another Inside Pitt practice report as Cincinnati week plugs ahead. We heard from Andre Powell, Ryan Manilek, and Devin Danielson today, and one of the biggest things that they talked about, and you can kind of imagine what the running backs coach, the linebackers coach, and a defensive tackle would be talking about, and that's the step up in competition that Pitt is going to face, especially when you think about what Cincinnati is going to bring to them physically. Like I said, the competition takes a step up. So how will Pitt handle that challenge? They're facing a team of Bearcats that looks a lot more like a normal Power Five team. A lot of speed coming in the form of transfers from the ACC and the SEC in particular. We talked about that yesterday with Emory Jones and D. Wiggins, some of the receivers they have. But Cincinnati has also been one of those teams that on the fringes, quite a power school, but they were clearly the class of the group of five. That's why they got that invite to the Big 12. But the past past few years, they've really taken on the look of a major conference team just physically. I think that's one thing that Pitt's coaches have emphasized all week is that these guys are big. And they are certainly no Wofford. I don't think anyone was expecting that. But, if you thought that this was, you know, a team like Tulsa or someone from the American where Cincinnati came from, no disrespect for them, but Cincinnati has been, the equivalent of a major conference team for a long time now. And, the past few years, when they think about them going to the Peach Bowl or them making the playoff, that's really become even more and more true. And this year it's kind of come to a head with the way that their new head coach, Scott Satterfield, is kind of portaled and built this roster through transfers. They're big and they're physical and they're fast, and that is something that Pitt's gonna have to deal with. It's an adjustment going from Wofford to them. Cincinnati's gonna kind of go through the same thing, but this is a completely different challenge that Pitt is gonna have to step up, and it's one that I think they will be able to handle. If they're gonna lose, it's not gonna be because I think they're gonna get out physical by Cincinnati. I think especially the way this roster is built this year, they're a little bigger themselves. You think about last year's team. I think especially about the Tennessee game where they did have the speed to keep up with the pace that Tennessee had. They were a little bit smaller, I think, especially up the middle. There's a huge difference, I think, between Brandon Hill and Eric Hallett versus Javon McIntyre and PJ O'Brien. Just in terms of like pure size, I think the same thing goes for having DeAndre Jules and Devin Danielson at defensive tackle instead of Kalijah Cansey. And even Servassier Dennis, as good as he was, is not the same kind of guy physically as Shane Simon is. Just in terms of weight, maybe a little faster. But again, these guys were great players and they were really good for Pitt for a long time. But Pitt has some athletes. Pitt has, I think, a little bit more of a traditional look, especially when you think about that interior, the defensive line, where they like to go a little bit smaller from time to time, recruit smaller guys. This year they've gone bigger. They've got some bigger dudes, and that's certainly going to affect how Cincinnati looks at them and how this game is won in the trenches. And like I talked about yesterday with the secondary having to handle a different level of speed, it's going to be a different task for the front seven to handle that physicality and stay disciplined while also keeping an eye on all that speed that Cincinnati does have, that improved speed that Cincinnati does have, that power five speed that they have when starting with the quarterback, Emory Jones, like I said. Moving on, Andre Powell, I think, provided some of the more, insightful interviews and answers of the day. We talked a lot about the running back competition, which is still an open question. The Panthers are still looking for a top dog in that running back room. If you ask me, I'm really not sure how we got to the point where Rodney Hammond is not that slam dunk top guy in the running back room. He's listed as the top tailback on the depth chart, but it didn't really play out that way against Wofford. Daniel Carter took the bulk of the carries. He ran for more yards. Andre, that he was the one to gain the most yards after contact. At least that's what his assessment of it was. And it's just striking that he was listed as a co-starter alongside Hammond, and then took 5 of the first 7 carries with the first team offense. He was really heavily involved in a lot of different ways. you know, Rodney is the most experienced and I'd argue the most talented guy at that position and in that room. And that tells me that something major must have happened during training camp and during spring ball for a guy that had been expected to dominate that room and be the top guy and be the workhorse. For him to kind of, I guess you could say he hasn't fallen off of that perch, but he definitely has some more competition now than we might have thought. And I think that's because of the strides Daniel Carter made. For so long, this was a guy that we had heard about from coaches and players during training camp. People had raved about him, but then you get to game day and he's just really not a massive factor running the ball. Good blocker, can catch some passes, a really good special teamer as well. I don't want to say that he didn't make an impact on any of these teams because that wouldn't be true, but he was not Israel Abanikanda. He was not James Conner. He was not taking the bulk of the carries despite all the good things we had heard about him, and that changed at least in week 1. And the according to Powell, the share of snaps came out pretty even between just about everyone who played between Hammond, Sebo Flemister, Daniel Carter, like I said, but then also some young guys like Montravius Lloyd and Derek Davis. But Carter is the one who has really blown this thing wide open, I think. At least it seems that way right now. He lost 20 pounds over the offseason. He's moving a little bit better. He avoids injuries. He was there present for the entire training camp session, all 4 weeks, which, according to the coaches, was huge. You can notice how much better he moves, and that coupled with, I think, his experience and his versatility makes him pretty easy to plug and play. I think that was the big thing. Last year, you lose 20 pounds, you're automatically a much more versatile guy. He was pretty much locked into that fullback role last year, and now I think they do genuinely see him as more of a tailback. We had heard that before, but when you hear it so many times and don't actually see it play out in the regular season games, that's when you start to, think, hey, maybe this is a little bit of smoke and mirrors or maybe some coach speak or guys talking up a guy that they like his effort, but, they're maybe holding something a little bit back. They're not holding anything back for him this year. And to me, it's still a little odd. Like I said, I think Hammond is probably the best running back in that room, but if he hasn't performed up to that standard, then he hasn't performed up to that standard. And it seems like that's what the Pitt staff thinks. I don't think, if he didn't, tail off in some way that Carter wouldn't have caught up to him so quickly. That said, Powell appreciates the selflessness of the room. Like I said, he says the snaps got divided pretty evenly against Wofford, and there's still an open competition between Flemister, Hammond, and Carter, all guys that Powell thinks play winning football and that the Panthers can win with. So I don't think he's particularly concerned about making sure that they find a top guy, but they're waiting to see. They're using practice, they're using game time, trying to see who emerges as kind of the hot hand. I think there's some questions there too. Like, how do you define hot? How long will you wait for a guy to get hot? How many reps are you giving him before he proves to you that he's the guy or he's the hot hand? Those are questions that are still kind of open and they are subjective and they require a bit of feel for what Pitt needs at that moment. But like I said, Pitt has confidence in all 3 of these guys. I don't think it's a particularly awful strategy to leave them all on the table. I think Hammond's a pretty complete back. Flemister might give you a little bit more speed and can catch passes out of the backfield. Carter brings you more of that power. So they all do have something that they can bring to the table. So it's an interesting strategy. We'll see how it plays out, and we'll see if that rotation really tightens up by the time, next week rolls around or West Virginia and then ACC play starts, because that's when stuff really starts to get real. But, it is notable that there wasn't a lock on anyone to start entering this year as we might have thought they were. And it's interesting that Hammond wasn't a guy who could hold on to that spot, apparently. Like I said, we'll see how it plays out. But that was one of the biggest things that I noticed from that Wofford game and then heading into this week. So with that, I'm headed out of here. Thanks for tuning into another Inside Pitt Practice Report. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers, and find all of our reporting straight from Pitt practices and games at InsideThePanthers.com. Thanks for tuning into another episode. I'll see you next time.